My hands, worn and spotted with the wisdom of 68 years, moved with practiced grace over the roasting pan. The aroma of sage and thyme, of crisping turkey skin and savory herbs, filled my small kitchen. It was Thanksgiving, my favorite holiday, a day meant for gratitude, family, and shared warmth. For 2 days, I had been working tirelessly, a labor of love that my daughter, Jane, and my son-in-law, Mark, had always appreciated. At least, so I thought. The turkey, a glorious 20-pound bird, was a masterpiece of my culinary craft, its skin a deep, burnished gold. The cranberry sauce, with its zesty tang, simmered gently on the stove, and the sweet potato casserole, topped with toasted marshmallows, sat waiting to be baked. I had even made my famous apple pie, a family recipe passed down through generations, its lattice crust a testament to my dedication. The day had started with a quiet, joyful rhythm. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I had listened to old Frank Sinatra records, humming along to the familiar melodies as I worked. There was a sense of peace, a quiet anticipation of the laughter and happy chatter that would soon fill the house. I had envisioned my daughter hugging me, Mark giving me his usual hearty thanks, and the three of us sitting down to a meal I had poured my heart into. It was more than just a meal. It was a ritual, a connection to the past, a promise of a future of shared holidays and traditions. The first hint of trouble arrived not with a bang, but with a cold, almost surgical silence. The front door opened and closed without the usual cheerful greeting. I heard their footsteps in the hallway, muted and hurried. When they finally entered the kitchen, their faces were a mask of professional politeness, devoid of the genuine smiles I had expected. Jane, my own flesh and blood, my daughter, looked at me with an expression I could not quite place, something akin to a dismissive annoyance. Mark, normally so boisterous and friendly, simply nodded and stood awkwardly by the doorway. The warmth in the kitchen seemed to vanish instantly, replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with the cool autumn air. "Mom," Jane said, her voice flat. "We need to talk." Her tone was a foreign language, one I had never heard spoken to me before. The simple phrase, usually a prelude to a conversation about a problem or a request for advice, now felt like a final sentence. My heart, which had been so full of joy moments before, contracted with a sudden, painful clench. "What is it, dear?" I asked, my voice betraying none of the tremor I felt within. I wiped my hands on my apron, the small, familiar motion a desperate attempt to find an anchor in the shifting sea of this moment. Jane glanced at Mark, a silent communication passing between them, a look that said they had rehearsed this. "The thing is, we've decided to have a different kind of Thanksgiving this year. A more intimate gathering. With our friends." The words hung in the air, each one a sharp, stinging shard of glass. I looked around my kitchen, at the carefully prepared food, at the pie cooling on the counter, at the table set for three with my best china. My mind, usually so sharp, refused to process the information. It was Thanksgiving. We were family. This was our home. The home I had bought with my late husband, Arthur, the home where Jane had grown up. The home I had helped them with the down payment for, because they claimed they could not afford it on their own. "But I've been cooking all day," I stammered, the words feeling weak and pathetic even to my own ears. I gestured helplessly at the overflowing pans. "The turkey, the pie." Jane sighed, a sound of exasperation that cut me deeper than any angry word. "Mom, we appreciate the effort, really. But our friends are coming over and they're expecting something a little more modern. This is a bit much." She gestured vaguely at the feast I had prepared, as if it were a gaudy and embarrassing display. My world tilted on its axis. The kitchen, once a sanctuary of love, now felt like a stage for my public humiliation. The gentle hum of the refrigerator seemed to mock me, and the golden turkey, once a source of pride, now felt like a heavy, useless weight. I felt a wave of nausea, a profound, gut-wrenching pain that had nothing to do with indigestion. My daughter, my sweet Jane, was throwing me out of my own home on Thanksgiving. Mark, seeing the look on my face, stepped forward, his expression softening into a practiced, patronizing pity. Listen, Joan, we really didn't want to do this. But our friends are coming and we need the space. You understand, right? It's just for the night. You can stay with Eleanor. The casual way he mentioned my best friend's name made the betrayal feel even more complete. They had already planned my exile. They had already decided my fate for the night. They were not asking, they were informing me. And their request was based on the lie of needing space, as if a 68-year-old woman took up more room than the entire living room furniture. For the night. I whispered, the words barely audible. Where am I supposed to go? Mom, don't be dramatic, Jane said, her voice laced with impatience. Just call Eleanor. She's always happy to see you. It's not a big deal. We'll be done by 10, maybe 11. It was a big deal. It was the biggest deal. It was the destruction of everything I thought our relationship was built on. It was a clear and unambiguous statement that I was no longer a part of their intimate family circle, that I was a nuisance to be disposed of for the sake of their social life. My mind raced, trying to find a reason, a justification for their actions. Had I done something wrong? Had I said something to offend them? Had I been a burden without realizing it? I mentally replayed every conversation, every interaction over the past few weeks, searching for a sign, a clue, some indication that this was coming. There was nothing. This was not a response to my behavior. This was a manifestation of their own cold and calculating hearts. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of my abandoned meal. My eyes welled up with tears, hot and stinging, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing my pain. You want me to leave, I said, my voice steady now, the tremor replaced by a cold, hard resolve. It was not a question. Jane looked away, her gaze fixed on the perfectly golden turkey, a silent admission of her guilt. It's just for this evening, Mom. We'll talk about it later. There would be no later. I knew it in my bones. I see, I said, turning away from her and walking toward the back door. I will not be needing to talk about it later. I will call Eleanor. I walked past them, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I did not look back. I went into my bedroom, the place where I had slept for 35 years, and picked up a small bag. I put a few clothes in it, my toothbrush, and my wallet. I did not know where I was going or for how long. All I knew was that I was being cast out, not by strangers, but by the people I loved most in the world. As I closed the front door behind me, I heard the faint, distant laughter of their friends arriving. The sound was like a hammer blow to my soul. I walked down the sidewalk, the cold wind whipping around me. The houses were all lit up, their windows glowing with the warm, inviting light of family gatherings. I saw a couple laughing as they brought a covered dish to a neighbor's house. I saw children running in the front yard, bundled in coats, their happy shouts piercing the quiet night. The contrast between their joy and my profound, bone-deep loneliness was almost unbearable. I felt a cold knot of despair tighten in my stomach. The humiliation was not just the act of being thrown out, but the public display of it, the shame of being left to wander the streets on a holiday dedicated to belonging. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth, like ashes. They had not just asked me to leave, they had shown me my true place in their lives, an inconvenience, an obstacle to their happiness. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling, and called Eleanor. Her kind voice, filled with genuine concern and warmth, was a stark and painful reminder of the cruelty I had just faced. Oh, Joan, of course, you can stay. Come right over. I'll make us some tea. Don't you worry about a thing. Her words were a balm, but they could not heal the deep, gaping wound in my heart. As I walked, I was not just a woman leaving a house. I was a woman leaving her entire life, her entire sense of self behind. The love I had so freely given, the sacrifices I had made, the home I had helped them buy, all of it seemed to mean nothing. And that was the greatest betrayal of all. Eleanor's house was a sanctuary of soft light and gentle quiet, a stark contrast to the sterile cruelty of my daughter's home. She welcomed me with a warm, genuine hug that felt like a lifeline. I found myself sobbing into her shoulder, a torrent of grief and humiliation pouring out of me. My knees buckled, and Eleanor had to guide me to her worn but comfortable sofa, where she wrapped me in a thick, hand-knitted blanket. The simple act of kindness was almost too much to bear. "Oh, Joan, my dear," she murmured, patting my hand. "I am so sorry. I cannot believe they would do that." I recounted the events of the evening, my voice thick with emotion, the words tumbling out in a rush of pain. I told her about the turkey, the pie, the set table, and the cold, dismissive look in Jane's eyes. I spoke of the way Mark had acted, as if my very presence were a stain on their perfect social gathering. I felt a profound sense of shame, not for myself, but for them. It was a shame that ran so deep it felt as if it had seeped into my very bones. Eleanor listened patiently, her expression a mixture of profound sadness and simmering anger. She did not interrupt or offer platitudes. She simply let me speak, letting the raw, ugly truth of the evening fill the room. When I finally finished, exhausted and emotionally drained, she brought me a mug of hot chamomile tea. The steam rose in a delicate wisp, carrying the faint, soothing scent of herbs. "They do not deserve you, Joan," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "They do not deserve 1 ounce of your kindness or your love." Her words, so simple and true, were the first seeds of something new in me. Something besides grief. Something that felt like a flicker of defiance. But it was a flicker, not a fire. The despair was still too great. I stayed with Eleanor for the next few days. We did not speak of the incident constantly. Instead, we fell into a comfortable routine of quiet companionship. We drank coffee in the mornings, read the newspaper in companionable silence, and went for long, slow walks in the park, the fallen leaves crunching under our feet. I had time to think, to really think, for the first time in what felt like a very long time. My mind kept replaying the events of Thanksgiving, but now I was not just focused on the event itself. I was replaying every interaction I had had with Jane and Mark over the past few years. I saw the subtle disrespect, the casual dismissals, the moments when they would talk over me as if my opinions were irrelevant. I remembered the time I had offered to help them paint the living room, only to be told that they had it handled. I recalled the time I had offered to pay for a new dishwasher, only to be told that they had already picked one out without consulting me and that my money would just get in the way. It was a pattern, I realized, a slow and deliberate erosion of my place in their lives. They had been trying to sideline me for a very long time, and I, in my naive desire to be loved and needed, had been too blind to see it. My heart ached with the realization that their actions were not a sudden change of heart, but the culmination of years of quiet, emotional abuse. They had been treating me like an inconvenience, a burden, and a relic for years. And I had let them. I had let them because I was so desperate for their love and approval. The thought filled me with a mixture of immense sadness and a growing, seething indignation. For days after Thanksgiving, the call came. I was in Eleanor's living room, reading a book, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jane's name. My heart leaped, a foolish, desperate part of me hoping for an apology. I answered, my voice tentative. "Mom," Jane said, her voice tight, formal. "We need to talk about the house." My hand tightened on the phone. The flicker of defiance, which had been so small, suddenly grew into a small flame. "What about the house, Jane?" I asked, my voice as formal as hers. "We've decided it's just not working out," she said, the words feeling rehearsed, as if she were reading from a script. "We've talked about it, and we think it's best if you found somewhere else to live. We need the space for a home office, and we are planning to turn your bedroom into a gym." The callousness of her words was a physical blow. She was talking about my home, the place where I had raised her, the place where my husband had passed away, as if it were a spare room in a hotel. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. "My bedroom," I said, the words a low growl. "The room your father and I shared for 30 years? Mom, please. It's for our future. We have to think about our careers. This is a big opportunity for us. We need to be able to work from home, and your things are taking up a lot of space." "My things?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "My entire life's possessions are in that house, Jane. And I helped you buy that house." "That was a gift, Mom," she snapped, her voice losing its polite veneer and becoming sharp and hostile. "You gave us that money. That was a long time ago. We need to move on. A gift? I said, my voice rising. That was a down payment. I gave you $100,000 so you could have a home. That was not a gift to be forgotten. Look, we've spoken to a lawyer, Mark's voice suddenly interjected, cold and menacing. It's a verbal agreement. You gave us the money. There's no legal record of it. You have no claim to the property. We are giving you 30 days to get your things out. The words were a hammer blow. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. They had not just decided to throw me out, they had planned it, meticulously and with malice. They had spoken to a lawyer. They had built a wall of legal jargon and heartless logic around their cruel actions. The home I had loved, the home I had believed was my sanctuary, was now a trap, a cage from which I was being cast out. 30 days, I whispered, the words a cold, bitter echo in the silent room. 30 days, Mom. If you do not move your things, we will put them in a storage unit, and you will have to pay for it. Jane's voice was as sharp as a razor. And we are changing the locks tonight. We will give you a new key so you can get your things. But after 30 days, the key will no longer work. They were not just kicking me out, they were trying to financially drain me, to put me in a position where I would be forced to go to them for help, to be at their mercy. The plan was not just cruel, it was calculated. They wanted to strip me of everything. My home, my dignity, and my financial independence. I felt a profound, bone-deep weariness. It was not just the physical exhaustion of the past few days, but the emotional fatigue of a lifetime of giving to people who had only ever taken. I felt a sorrow so deep it was an ache, a constant, low thrum of pain that pulsed through my entire body. I had lived a life of kindness, of generosity, of selflessness. I had sacrificed my own dreams so that my daughter could have a better life. And this was my reward. Exile. Humiliation. Poverty. I understand, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I could not bring myself to say anything else. There were no words for the betrayal that was eating away at me from the inside. I hung up the phone and stood there, staring at the wall. The world seemed to be closing in on me. I was 68 years old, and I had no home, no money, and no family to turn to. My friends, though kind and supportive, could only do so much. The idea of finding a new home, of packing up a lifetime of memories, of starting over from scratch, was a monumental, terrifying task. It felt like an impossible summit to climb. The weight of it was suffocating. Eleanor came in, her face etched with concern. She had heard the conversation. She had heard my half of it. She saw the devastation on my face. She did not need me to say a word. She simply sat beside me and held my hand. And in that moment, I knew I was not alone. But the loneliness was still a constant presence. It was a cold, cruel monster that whispered in my ear that I was a failure, that I had been a fool, and that I had nobody but myself to blame. The 30 days they had given me felt like a countdown to my own personal apocalypse. I felt a growing sense of panic, a desperate fear that I would never be able to find a new home, that I would be left to wander, to be a burden on others. The house, my home, was no longer a place of love, but a tomb of shattered dreams, a monument to the greed and betrayal of the people I had raised. And the thought of going back there, of facing my daughter and son-in-law again, filled me with a profound, bone-deep dread. The 30-day countdown began with a sickening lurch, a grinding of gears in a machine that was my life. I felt a constant, low thrum of anxiety, a pulse of dread that beat in time with every ticking second on the clock. My mind, once a place of quiet contemplation and happy memories, had become a frantic, chaotic storm. I spent hours staring at classified ads for apartments I could not afford, my fingers hovering over the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. Each listing was a monument to my helplessness, a cruel reminder of how far I had fallen. Eleanor, bless her heart, was a constant source of support. She drove me around, showing me little apartments and tiny cottages, each one feeling like a prison. The spaces were small, cramped, and filled with a sense of temporary despair. I could not picture my life there, my precious possessions crammed into a handful of boxes, my memories reduced to a handful of photographs. My spirit, once so resilient, was being slowly, meticulously crushed by the weight of my circumstances. The worst part of it all was the complete and utter lack of communication from Jane and Mark. They did not call to ask how I was. They did not apologize. They did not even acknowledge my existence. Their silence was a weapon, a cold, indifferent wall that they had erected between us. I was no longer a person to them. I was a problem, a task to be completed, a piece of old furniture to be removed. The thought filled me with a deep, searing loneliness, a profound and tragic sense of being unwanted. I felt as if I had been erased from their lives, as if I had never mattered at all. One afternoon, a few weeks into my exile, Eleanor and I were driving through my old neighborhood. We were on our way to a small, affordable apartment complex a few miles away. As we turned the corner onto my street, I felt my heart lurch. I saw my house, my beautiful, familiar home. The lights were on, and I could see the faint glow of a television screen through the living room window. I saw Jane's car in the driveway, and a wave of homesickness and sorrow washed over me. I felt an irresistible urge to stop. "Eleanor, can we just stop for a moment?" I asked, my voice thin. Eleanor, understanding my need, pulled over and turned off the engine. I sat there, staring at my house, a monument to a life I had lost. I saw a flash of movement through the window, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. I saw Mark, my son-in-law, his arm around my daughter, a look of pure, unadulterated contentment on his face. They were laughing. The sight of their happiness, of their ease and comfort in the home they had stolen from me, was a physical shock. It was a cold, bitter reality check. They were not suffering. They were not feeling guilt. They were celebrating their victory, living their lives as if I had never existed. A profound realization washed over me. This was not about space. It was not about a home office or a gym. This was about power. This was about control. They had wanted to get rid of me, to take what they believed was rightfully theirs, and they had done so with a casual, chilling cruelty. They had been counting on my despair, on my helplessness, on my old age to keep me from fighting back. They had gambled on my weakness, on my grief, on my inability to stand up for myself. And they had been winning. I felt a sudden, seismic shift inside me. The despair, the sorrow, the loneliness that had been my constant companions for weeks began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard, white-hot fury. It was not the irrational, sputtering anger of a child, but the quiet, controlled rage of a woman who has been pushed too far. I looked at my house, at my daughter's laughing face, and I felt a profound sense of clarity. The old me, the woman who had sacrificed and given and suffered in silence, was dead. In her place stood a new woman, a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. A woman who was not going to be a victim anymore. My eyes swept across the street, a few yards down. I saw a house, a beautiful, old Victorian with a sprawling lawn and a wraparound porch. The house had a large, ornate, "For Sale" sign on the front lawn. It was a beautiful home, much bigger and more grand than my own. A crazy, reckless, wonderful idea began to form in my mind, a thought so audacious and so perfect that it almost took my breath away. It was a plan that was so simple, so elegant in its poetic justice, that it made my heart sing. I did not say a word to Eleanor. I simply asked her to drive me to the real estate agency. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a new kind of light. She saw the change in me. She saw the old sadness had been replaced by a fierce, determined resolve. She knew, without me having to say a word, that the game had changed. At the real estate office, I was met by a kind, young agent named Sarah. She was a breath of fresh air, a ray of sunshine in the suffocating darkness of my past few weeks. She listened patiently as I explained that I was looking for a home, a very specific home, in a very specific neighborhood. I did not give her all the details, not yet. I simply told her I wanted to see the house on Elm Street, the Victorian with the wraparound porch. Sarah's eyes widened when she saw the address. "Oh, that's a beautiful home," she said. "But it's also very, very expensive. Are you sure you are?" Her voice trailed off, a note of polite concern in her voice. I understood her hesitation. I was an older woman, dressed in a simple, practical coat with a worn handbag and a look of profound weariness on my face. I did not look like a woman who could afford $1 million home. "I am very sure," I said, my voice firm. "I am very, very sure. Can you show me the house?" Sarah, a consummate professional, did not ask any more questions. She simply nodded and made an appointment for the next day. As we drove away, I felt an almost giddy sense of anticipation. It was a feeling I had not felt in years. I had a plan. A glorious, beautiful, and absolutely perfect plan. A plan that was going to change everything. My anger had not made me a villain, it had made me a warrior. And the battle had just begun. I did not have the $1 million in my bank account. I had a little over 100,000, most of it from my pension, and the rest from a modest nest egg my late husband and I had set aside. It was money I had always intended to use for a down payment on a place of my own, should I ever need it. But I had always believed that I would never need it. I had been foolish. I had been complacent. I had trusted too much. Now, I would use that money for its original purpose. But I would not be using it to buy a house in a little apartment complex. I would be using it to change my entire life. As Eleanor and I drove back to her home, I finally spoke. "I have a secret, Eleanor," I said, my voice filled with a strange, dark joy. Eleanor smiled, her eyes twinkling. "I know, dear. I have always known. I have a bank account," I said. "A different one. My husband, Arthur, was a clever man. He had a secret project. He believed in diversification. He did not trust the stock market. So, he put a little aside for me, just in case." Eleanor's smile widened. "How much, my dear?" I told her the number, and she gasped. It was not $1 million, not even close. But it was enough. More than enough. It was more than enough to make them, my daughter and my son-in-law, rue the day they had ever crossed me. I had a power that they did not know about. I had a secret weapon that was going to be my salvation. And the battle was about to turn. I could not wait for the next day. I could not wait to see their faces when they saw what I was about to do. I could not wait for the moment of their profound, crushing realization that they had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The next morning, I awoke with a newfound sense of purpose. The exhaustion and dread that had plagued me for weeks had been replaced by a quiet, simmering energy. I felt alive for the first time since that terrible Thanksgiving night. Eleanor drove me to the bank, where I had a long, private meeting with the bank manager. I explained my situation, my voice calm and clear, my resolve unwavering. I showed her the accounts, the investments, the small, quiet, and very powerful nest egg that my late husband, Arthur, had built for me. The bank manager, a woman with kind eyes and a professional demeanor, was visibly impressed. My husband's foresight, his wisdom, and his love for me, a love that had outlasted his life, were now my greatest strength. With the bank's help, I secured the loan for the house on Elm Street. It was a complex and painstaking process, but every form I signed, every document I reviewed, felt like a victory. I was not just buying a house, I was buying my freedom. I was buying back my dignity. I was buying a future that no longer depended on the whims and callousness of my daughter and her husband. Over the next 2 weeks, the process unfolded with a speed that left me breathless. I had told Sarah, the real estate agent, about my situation, and she, a young woman with a strong sense of justice, became my ally. She expedited everything, pulling strings and making calls, her dedication a testament to the power of human kindness. She found me a moving company, a team of strong, capable men who carefully and respectfully packed my things. They were meticulous, treating my possessions with a reverence that my own daughter had not shown. Every box they labeled, every piece of furniture they wrapped, felt like a reclamation of my life. I was not just packing up old things, I was packing up my memories, my history, my soul. The day came when I was ready to move. The moving truck, a large, imposing vehicle, was a stark presence on my street. I stood on the porch of my old house, the house I had shared with Arthur, and watched as the movers carried out the last of my things. I saw the curtains I had sewn, the table where my daughter had done her homework, the couch where Arthur and I had watched countless movies. It was a silent, somber process. I did not see Jane or Mark. They were at work, blissfully unaware of the seismic shift that was taking place just a few feet away from them. I did not want to see them. I did not need to. The knowledge of what was to come was a private, secret joy that I held close to my heart. The move was quick and efficient. The movers carefully unloaded everything into my new home, the beautiful Victorian on Elm Street. The house was a monument to old-world elegance, with its beautiful woodwork, its spacious rooms, and its grand, sweeping staircase. It was a home that was full of a promise, a future that was bright and full of possibility. I was in the living room, a place of bright light and open space, when I saw it. The window overlooked the street, and from where I was standing, I could see my old house, my former life. I could see my daughter and son-in-law's car pull into the driveway. They were laughing, their faces filled with a careless, thoughtless joy. They were home. They had won. Or so they thought. I watched, my heart pounding in my chest, as Jane got out of the car. She was on her phone, and she was laughing. She looked happy, radiant. She had no idea. She did not see my car in the driveway. She did not see the moving truck leaving. She saw nothing but her own perfect, carefree life. I walked to the front window, and I opened the curtains. I saw her look up, her gaze drawn to the bright, open windows of the house next door. She saw me. The laughter died on her lips. Her eyes widened, a look of utter, complete shock spreading across her face. She dropped her phone, and it clattered to the ground, a small, insignificant sound in the face of the monumental silence that had just fallen over the street. I saw Mark get out of the car. He looked at Jane, and then he followed her gaze. He saw me standing there, a ghost from their past, a living, breathing monument to their cruelty. His face, once so smug and self-satisfied, went pale. His jaw went slack, and his eyes, which had always held a cruel, superior glint, were now filled with a bewildered, terrified disbelief. He had no words. He had no explanation. He had no defense. I did not have to say a word. I did not have to justify my actions. The sight of me, standing in my new home, a home that was bigger, better, and more beautiful than the one they had stolen from me, was enough. It was a public and humiliating act of defiance. It was a declaration of war. And I had won. Over the next few weeks, I began to build my new life. I threw myself into redecorating, into gardening, into making my new home a sanctuary of peace and beauty. I invited my friends over, and my house became a hub of laughter, of conversation, of friendship. I started a book club, I took up a new hobby of painting, and I learned to play the piano. I was not just living, I was thriving. I was not just surviving, I was flourishing. I had never felt so alive, so free, so completely in control of my own destiny. And they, my daughter and her husband, were left to face the consequences. They could not sell their house. Who would want to buy a house with a neighbor who had just been thrown out of their own home? Their reputation in the neighborhood was in ruins. Their friends, the same friends who had been at their Thanksgiving dinner, would not speak to them. The word had gotten out. The story had spread. The truth, in all its brutal and unsparing detail, had a way of getting around. They were not just facing social isolation, they were facing the profound and terrible consequences of their own actions. They had chosen to be cruel, and now they were reaping what they had sown. They came to me, of course. They came to my door, their faces pale and drawn, their pleas filled with a desperate, pathetic sincerity. They apologized. They begged, they promised to make things right. They offered to give me the house back, to give me money, to give me whatever I wanted. But their words were empty. They were not apologizing for what they had done to me. They were apologizing for the consequences of what they had done to themselves. I looked at them, my daughter and my son-in-law, and I felt nothing. The love I had once felt for them, a love that had been so strong it had been a part of my very being, was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, dignified emptiness. I did not yell at them. I did not scream. I did not gloat. I simply looked at them, my face expressionless, and I closed the door. My revenge was not just buying the house next door. My revenge was living my life to the fullest. My revenge was finding a new community, a new purpose, a new way of being. My revenge was showing them that I was not a fragile old woman to be discarded. I was a force of nature. I was a woman of strength, of dignity, and of grace. And the house next door, my new home, was a testament to my triumph. It was a beautiful, constant reminder that I had won. It was the sweetest revenge of all.